The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So Ben Shapiro, I guess, has like a temporary, like a seasonal show of sorts on Fox News that's related to the upcoming midterm election. And there has been a segment that there have been a couple segments actually that Ben Shapiro has done, one on this Fox show and also in prior programming that Ben Shapiro has done about socialism or social democracy or Marxism or communism. And it's sort of hard to tell which one it is that he's talking about at different points. And we're going to go through some videos. And the point I want to make to you here is that there is sort of a deliberate simultaneous confusion and confounding that is being done by Ben Shapiro and others. This is emblematic of what many others are doing, where they are both misstating what socialism and social democracy and Marxism are, but also making bad arguments against them. And there's really no better way to explain this to you than to show you some of the clips that we have. So this is from the Fox News show that Ben Shapiro has been doing. And you can tell from the start that there's just something wrong with the presentation. There's just like fundamental factual knowledge that seems to be either missing or being deliberately ignored. Let's start with clip number one.
Norway has become the favorite democratic socialist test case for the American left. Venezuela, people are eating dogs in the streets. And Cuba's gone out of fashion. Turns out that when people are floating 1950s Chevys into the Atlantic Ocean, that's kind of a bad sign.
So the argument here is that you've got Norway and Venezuela and Cuba, and they're all Marxist, or so he sort of initially suggests, but then later he'll kind of go back with that. And that Norway's going okay, but Venezuela and Cuba are not. So that what the left does is cherry pick and ignore Venezuela and Cuba and only talk about Norway. So just that one idea would be worthy of like an hour of analysis, or at least a half hour. But the main points here are, number one, actual progressives should talk about the failings of Venezuela and Cuba. I do it all the time. There are people on the left who hate me for that. It's become sort of like a litmus test for the litmus test left likes to criticize others who talk about Venezuela or Cuba. The Leninist left, call it whatever you want. But Venezuela and Cuba are authoritarian takeovers of society with populist left-wing rhetoric. And as a progressive social democrat, I'm opposed to that, and I talk about the problems there. But then there's the real distortion, which is that anyone is saying Norway is Marxist. And Ben Shapiro will eventually say Norway's not actually Marxist, and so the left is also wrong about that. Norway has good and bad things going on, quite a bit of good. But Norway is a social democracy in the sort of standard Scandinavian model period. So to claim that even people on the left are saying it's Marxist, to even mention Norway when talking about Marxism is a joke. Norway's not even socialist, never mind communist or Marxist. And then Ben Shapiro immediately goes on to say, but Norway isn't actually Marxist anyway.
There are just a few problems with this perspective. First off, Norway isn't socialist. It's a capitalist country burdened with massively expensive socialist redistribution programs.
Okay, so in the first clip he says Marxist, and now he says it's not actually socialist. That's obvious, right? I don't talk to any serious people on the left who say that Norway is an example of a socialist success or a communist success or a Marxist success. It's a social democracy. It's capitalism, right? And that is a fundamental distortion here. He also has talked about actual social democracy, democratic socialism, and some of these same confusions exist. Let's look at another clip.
Now, let's talk for a second about the appeal of democratic socialism, because what you hear from the left is that democratic socialism is what exists in places like Denmark and Sweden. That is real socialism. There's only one problem. None of this is true. Nima Sanandaji, who writes for The Stream, he has a very good piece about myths regarding Nordic socialism. He's an author and researcher. He holds a PhD from the Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden and conducted research at the University of Cambridge. And he has a great piece about why it is that so many people think that democratic socialist republics are the ones that are really succeeding, when in reality they're succeeding in spite of their socialism. So here's what he says. The success of Nordic countries is based on the fact that historically they have relied on free markets and protection of private property. The only exception is a short period in Sweden wherein socialist policies crippled growth and job creation. Nordic nations do have high taxes and generous welfare, but in many other regards, they have unusually free markets.
That's exactly right. They have free markets. They have relatively high taxes. They have lots of social welfare programs. That's not a debunking of socialism. It's just confirming what social democracy is, right? It's capitalism combined with strong social welfare. He's acting like the writer he cites has found some glitch in democratic socialism arguments. No, it's merely a definition of social democracy. It's what social democracy claims to be and is. We can define social democracy many ways, but it's a mixed ideology that promotes progressive, democratic, pro-social justice polity with a capitalist economy, period. And then again, he does more of this same conflation.
Danish Prime Minister Lars Rasmussen says after seeing his country held up as an example in the American presidential debate, he told students in a 2015 speech at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, quote, "I know that some people in the U.S. associate the Nordic model with some sort of socialism. Therefore, I would like to make one thing clear. Denmark is far from a socialist planned economy. Denmark is a market economy. When it comes to areas such as business regulations, trade policy, investment freedom, vouchers in the provision of education, elderly care and health care, and partial privatization of retirement savings, Nordic countries are among the most free market in the world."
That's right. Holding up Norway or Denmark as socialist countries is wrong. But they are the definition of social democracy, and this is what's missing from the conversation. It is a false debate that is being sort of framed here. One more clip.
Hey, Nordic countries did not become rich by relying on socialism. Sweden is the only Nordic country that actually experimented with socialism in the 70s and 80s, and instead, it destroyed Sweden's economy.
That's right. They didn't become rich by being socialists. They became rich by allowing for the creativity and innovation of capitalism while understanding the limits of capitalism in some markets, spending enough on social programs to have as many citizens as possible able to afford being part of that capitalist economy because they're not paying off medical bills or student loans. This constant back and forth between talking about socialism and democratic socialism and Marxism and mixing terms and pretending to be debunking something when you're actually confirming it, all while speaking really fast and with an indignant tone, it works really well on people. And then there's this really important thing that we shouldn't forget.
And finally, important to note that if you're talking about why Denmark does better, Sweden does better, Scandinavia does better, important to note, all of these groups, when they come to America, do better in the United States than they do back in their home countries. So in Denmark, Danish Americans actually do better in America than they do in Denmark. So all of the talk about how all of these countries are thriving because of socialism just isn't true. Now,
again, he says they're not thriving in socialism, but these are social democracies, and this is really important. He says Danish people do better as Danish Americans when they move here than back in Denmark. How you measure that is a serious question, and what does it mean to even do better? They have a higher salary here? Because if that's the argument, you've got to add in, when you calculate their Danish salary, the healthcare and the education that they get in Denmark. That needs to be added to their Danish salary if you really want to compare. And then you've got to adjust for purchasing power, and you've got to consider self-reported happiness and life satisfaction. If we're just comparing salaries, if that's what we're doing, it really tells us very, very little about whether Danes do better in Denmark or in the United States. So I could go on, but the most important things are around this issue. Number one, don't get confused by social democracy versus socialism because they want you to be confused, okay? Number two, don't let other people tell you which system of government a country has in the context of debunking that system of government. You've got to figure out for yourself if they're actually honestly representing what system of government exists there. And then thirdly, please look this stuff up for yourself because there are some really important conversations happening around these issues. And if you even allow someone like Ben Shapiro to set the boundaries and frame the debate for you, you are by definition going to come out extraordinarily uninformed. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Tracy Stafford. Tracy, thank you for supporting our program. Also want to say thanks to Judy Goldman, who is today's longtime sustaining member of the day with us since 2013. Tracy, Judy, thank you. Join them at www.joinpakman.com. The phones are jammed at 617-830-4750. Let's go to our first caller from the 979 area code. Caller from 979, who's this?
This is John from Houston.
Go ahead, John.
David, I just had a question for you, and I wanted to get your thoughts on just the personal growth aspect of the people that lead us. And I had a friend of mine. She's a woman. We grew up together, very, very close, and we're having a conversation about this. So, at what point do we forgive people? And there's different levels of wrong, like in terms of Al Franken,
sure,
and someone like Roy Moore. Al Franken is not Roy Moore. Did we overpunish? Did we shoot ourselves in the foot? And as progressives, when do we start taking into account that we actually have made some personal growth in our lives? Like Franken took accountability for what he did, and he owned it. And maybe we went too far. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. If maybe we did go too far, and if we hold ourselves to a different standard than right wingers would hold themselves. They give
I think I got it.
on.
So the left definitely holds itself to a different standard. I mean, we see that when nobody on the left was defending Anthony Weiner when he had his scandal. You had people, even with Bill Clinton, like we were talking about, with one alleged exception, you're talking about consensual incidents that were inappropriate in different ways. With Al Franken, you were talking about something that is, 1% of what Brett Kavanaugh was accused of, and yet you did have Democratic senators saying he should resign. So I don't know if the answer is that the left should stop holding people accountable. It's that we need to expose the hypocrisy here, and merely exposing it won't do anything, because the thing is, the right doesn't care. The right doesn't care about the hypocrisy as long as they can keep putting the people they want in the Senate, in governors' mansions, in the Supreme Court. So it's really, there's the moral question, which is Democrats, if they are willing to do what's right when it comes to these allegations, they should continue doing it for moral reasons. And then we also need to have sort of the pragmatic discussion, which is, was it right to call for Franken's resignation in that particular case? And that's sort of a question you've got to answer on a one-on-one, case-by-case basis.
I agree. It's it was tough watching him go down, because we were saying that he admitted to everything that he did. He owned it, and said that gave a bullet point of things that he did wrong. And I think that in that particular case, you're right. I think we should go case by case on it. But it kind of looks like on the other side, like, oh, they just give him a pass, but that's not the case. I think people need to be a little bit more aware that everything is on a case-by-case basis. And, some people don't take accountability, and there are different levels of wrong.
There are.
And so
there are. Yep. John, thank you. I got to run. I got a ton of people holding, but an important topic, and I appreciate hearing from you about it. Let's go next to our caller from the 614 area code. Caller from 614, who's this? Where are you calling from? 614, are you there?
Hello?
That's you.
Oh, sorry, I didn't recognize the area code because...
Oh, is it country code 61
Australia.
instead? Oh, it's Australia. I got you. It's country code 61.
There we go. Hi, David. I'm
Hi.
Angela.
Hi, Angela. Go ahead. What's on your mind today?
I'm calling mainly because of my overwhelming fear of what my government's doing, and just little things that I've noticed which I don't think many other people would notice because only I'm that into it. That actually are quite alarming, like the amount of funding we've put aside for natural disasters went from 170 million last year, 100 million this year, 10 million next year, down to zero by 2020. And at the moment, I think our environment minister has probably had, I think, owned shares in coal, and then our prime minister walked around Parliament House, I think last year, holding a lump of coal, passing it to people, going, "It's only coal, it won't hurt you." And it's. But I vote. I encourage my other friends on who we should, but we've got the same situation of the lesser of two evils, and I'm just pretty sure, and especially I think they're moving all of the meteorologists and like people that will be watching the weather to one centralized place in Sydney, so that's not very helpful for the rest of the country. So I think that there's so many things that they're doing which I think will be catastrophic when it comes to it. And I don't think there's much anyone can do about it except for de-corrupting everything.
Yes, corruption is a big, big thing. I don't know too much about the specifics you're mentioning, Angela, but did you have any question, or it was just that comment?
Is there any other way to get through to your representatives other than the standard basic ways, like especially when you feel like it's urgent and dire?
It's all the normal stuff. It's emailing them, calling them, showing up and protesting, civil disobedience, general strikes, right? I mean, it's in countries like the United States and Australia, those are the things that are available. And then there are people who will go beyond that into violence. I think it's counterproductive in the long term, but those are the options that we mostly have to differing degrees. Angela, thank you for the call. Great to hear from our viewers in Australia. That might have been our first call from Australia. Let's see who is on from the 860 area code. Could be someone from our friendly neighbors to the southwest, Connecticut, maybe 860. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Mike from Massachusetts, actually.
Oh, all right. Go ahead, Mike.
So this is kind of a two-part question, David. I'm just wondering how you feel about this. As a progressive, I look at what this whole Kavanaugh debacle did, and I really think that, the Democrats, they really just overplayed their hand with that whole thing.
Okay.
And I don't think they really gained anything from it. And in the end. And, my second part is, I look at this crop of candidates that are out there for 2020. The Elizabeth Warrens, even though, I live in Massachusetts, I'm going to vote for her.
Yep.
The Cory Bookers, the Kamala Harrises. I think Trump is going to make mincemeat out of anybody like that. I think whether he wins or loses down in Texas, Beto O'Rourke is our only hope. I think the way that guy has got for president, yes. I think the way that guy has galvanized that population down there, has the energy that he has, I think he's the only guy who can take out Trump.
Okay, so let's take this in a couple parts. Number one, I don't know. I'm not ready to say that the Kavanaugh thing is just a loss for Democrats, because based on the polling that I've seen, it has energized Democrats more than Republicans to vote in November. And I think we'll be able to determine whether it helped or hurt Democrats in like 3 weeks. So let's check back in about that. I'm open to the idea that it could be good for Democrats in that way, although it's a disaster to have Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court. We were talking here yesterday in our studio about our fears that people like Elizabeth Warren, Biden, Bernie Sanders, Michael Avenatti, right, that these people are just not going to stand a chance. And so I sort of share your concerns there. I don't know that Beto O'Rourke is the answer. I think that he would have a significant set of challenges, even just winning the primary, never mind going up against Trump. But I think where you and I agree is I am very concerned that there is no clear, I'm not seeing anybody for 2020. And I've been saying we've got to get past 2018 before we talk about it. We're almost past it, so we can sort of start to think about it. I'm not seeing anyone where I say, oh, here's someone with no obvious significant liabilities. And that's scary.
I mean, who else is out there? I mean, Gavin Newsom out in California, he hasn't even been elected governor yet.
Forget about that. I mean, listen, forget about it. I don't see how he has a path, but I've been wrong before, that's for sure.
I just don't see. I mean, Trump is a unique candidate. We've never seen anything like this guy before, ever, in American politics.
Absolutely.
And I just don't think that any of the traditional Democratic candidates that we're going to run, I mean, I don't think they're up to take on a guy who's as obnoxious as who just is going to go for the throat every single time he's on stage.
Well, who else is obnoxious? It's Avenatti, right? That's the one argument for Avenatti, which would be the guy is just as obnoxious as Trump, and he sort of gets how to get under Trump's nerves. I mean, he's a lawyer who appeared and started representing Stormy Daniels, and Trump is now tweeting about him, right? So Avenatti clearly knows how to get under Trump's skin. That would be the one argument, Pat, for Avenatti.
What about Joe Biden, right? I mean, he's not right on all the policies, but he's tough talking. He even challenged Trump to a fight at one point.
Is a nearly 80-year-old white guy the path forward? I'm not playing identity.
Too, right?
I'm not playing identity politics. I'm just asking the question of how. Like, I love Joe Biden. I would be totally behind Joe Biden. I just am not sure he can win.
Yeah, I think he would have maybe the best shot, but I mean, like you just said, David, like, is an 80-year-old white guy really where we need to be going in the Democratic Party right now?
I mean, it's not that that's a disqualifier. Biden is no less qualified, intelligent, or knowledgeable by virtue of being a nearly 80-year-old white guy. I'm just thinking out loud in terms of the impact it would have if the way to defeat a 73-year-old obnoxious white guy is with a more polite 80-year-old white guy. I don't know. Maybe it is. I'm just not sure.
Thanks, David.
Yep. All right. Appreciate the call. Thank you. Yeah, we're almost ready to start talking about 2020. As I said,
we got a few more weeks.
We got a few more weeks, but we are getting close to ready. Let's go to our caller from the 305 area code. Maybe from I think 305 is Miami. Love Miami if that's where you're calling from. If not, I still love Miami. You're just not calling from there. 305. 305. Are you there at all? Let's start there.
Hello?
That is you.
How are you?
Good. We're not on speakerphone, are we?
No.
Oh boy. All right, go ahead.
I have a question for you, and I want to make a quick point, though. My question is, it really helped Joe Biden win the election?
Oh boy. Sorry. Well, you're breaking up. I don't know if we're on Bluetooth or if you have a bad signal, but you're breaking up. Can you ask your question one more time?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes. Go ahead.
Should Democrats focus on helping Joe Manchin win re-election? Like, Joe Manchin, to me, needs to lose. I think Joe Manchin is a disaster for the Democratic Party.
Yep.
Like, he's the only Democrat talking about supporting Trump in 2020.
Right.
He voted for Kavanaugh. I really don't think he should be a senator anymore. And I'm willing to lose control of the Senate if that means we lose Manchin.
Okay, see, now you go. So here's the thing. The Democratic Party needs to replace Manchin. Should we be willing to lose?
We can't, though.
Hold on a second. Should we be willing to lose control of the Senate when so much is riding on the control of the Senate right now? I think the answer is no. Now, you might say, well, if Manchin's just going to vote for Republicans, you might have control of the Senate on paper, but not in reality. He's not going to vote with Republicans on everything. So I feel that we should not say we don't care about control of the Senate if it means Manchin loses and a Republican wins. But there needs to be a plan for trying to get a real Democrat in. But you've got to remember, Manchin's in West Virginia. Is there any other kind of Democrat that could win? I don't know the answer.
Well, Bernie Sanders won all the precincts in West Virginia, and I think that we can win Texas. I think we can win the Mississippi special election. So I'm not really worried about Manchin winning, and I really don't want Simon to win because she votes 61% of the time as Trump, and she's kind of not a real Democrat. Same with Bredesen. I do think that maybe Wilson can pull up an upset, and I think David Beal, he's running in Mississippi against Roger Wicker. I think he has a chance because Roger Wicker hasn't really been doing well in polling. He's like in the 47 range.
Right. Yeah, so we're getting into a lot of different races. I think the Manchin question, though, to focus on that is an interesting one, but I don't want to lose control of the Senate right now by replacing Manchin with a Republican. But Manchin's a major problem. Hey, I didn't catch your name. What was your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Paul.
Paul, okay. All right. I appreciate the call, Paul. Thank you so much. Yeah, Pat, you had a thought on this?
Oh, well, I'd rather have Manchin, who votes with Trump 60% of the time, than some Republican
who votes
in
95.
West Virginia who's going to vote with Trump 95% of the time. And the time to primary Joe Manchin has passed. Paula Jean Swearengin ran against him and lost, and this is what we have so far. It's either Joe Manchin or a Republican.
And you also have to remember, would a further left Democrat win in West Virginia? I don't know the answer. I'm not saying this. I'm not playing the least of two evil. I'm just asking the question: is there a different type of Democrat that could win right now in West Virginia? And I don't know the answer to that. Let's go to our next caller from the 918 area code. Caller from 918, who's this? Where are you calling from?
My name is Raquel. I'm calling from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
All right, Raquel, what's on your mind today?
Well, my husband and I have been fighting an immigration battle for the last 5 years. We got an I-130 visa. He's from Yemen originally.
Yeah.
And we have just had so many problems. One day they'll say, okay, everything looks good. And then the next moment they'll come up with some excuse why to extend it and put it in administrative processing.
And sorry, this is which agency is this?
This is USCIS.
Okay.
United States Immigration Services Center.
And what's an example of the stuff where, like, what would be an example of something that they say needs to be done after saying it looks like everything's good to go?
First, they made up this story about polygamy.
Polygamy?
And we were able to prove that there was no polygamy.
Okay.
And that was a lot of fun. And
so let me see.
next,
let's not skip past that, Raquel, if we can talk through it. So there was a question raised about whether your husband in Yemen was involved in a polygamous situation?
That is correct. That is correct. But what happened was he left Yemen and he went to Norway.
Right.
Okay. And he's been in Norway for the past 10 years.
Right.
Okay. So I left Norway because it's a very expensive country to live in. All right. We've been trying to get him over to the United States. This has been going on for 5 years, and we've had nothing but problems.
So this isn't even necessarily related to, sorry, Raquel, this isn't necessarily even related to Trump, that this has been going on even before Trump.
Yeah, but it does relate back to Trump because he wants to do a ban on 5 different countries, and Yemen is involved.
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is there were 3 years before Trump during which you also were having problems.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, got it.
But now the vetting has become so extreme, I can't even get my husband into this country. Neither one of us has committed a crime.
Sure.
Neither one of us has done anything to deserve what has happened. So
and to be clear, Raquel, because you're married, he should eventually be allowed to join you and would qualify for citizenship through marriage, right? Like it's being delayed. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Wow.
This is a problem. Now they've made it where you have to go out and get an attorney, whether you can afford one or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just became a very expensive process. So I don't know what to say. I think once he's out of power and we get somebody else different, I think we'll have a better chance of getting him in through this country.
That may be, although the fact that it was so difficult even under Obama certainly makes me slightly skeptical of that, but I think it will be better. It just could be 6 years. Raquel, I got to run. I appreciate hearing from you, and I'm really sorry for what's going on. It sounds really, really bad. And it sounds partially related to Donald Trump. That's all the time I have for calls today. We will take calls again if you're holding, and there are many of you. I apologize we didn't get to you, but we are just out of time. We will take calls next week. Quick break. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
So last week or the week before, we covered Donald Trump calling on a Kurdish journalist by saying Mr. Kurd. And of course, the Kurds being an ethnic group, saying Mr. Kurd, ask your question would be like saying Mr. Jew or Mr. Black, and it didn't really make any sense. But what is a great thing that came from that is that it reminded us of my interview with Stephen Mansfield about the Kurds and Kurdistan and how the Kurds fit into the future of the Middle East, which we did back in November of 2014. And what's amazing about this interview is that it would seem like one of those interviews that appeals to a slice of our audience really significantly, and a lot of people just don't care about it. But this interview ended up doing extraordinarily well, hundreds of thousands of views on YouTube, if not more than 500,000 at this point. And it is a really fascinating interview, and Stephen Mansfield is excellent on this topic of the Kurds. So that's where we are starting this week in terms of classic interview, with my interview from November of 2014, Stephen Mansfield, about the Kurds and Kurdistan. I'm joined today by Stephen Mansfield, who's the author of The Miracle of the Kurds, a remarkable story of hope reborn in northern Iraq. And I think a great place to start, Stephen, is your book focuses on northern Iraq, but it would be important, I think, for the audience to understand the Kurds as a group beyond just Iraq. So let's start there. Who are the Kurds?
Well, it's probably most important to know that the Kurds are a non-Arab people who consider themselves the descendants of the ancient Medes. People probably know this term best from their Bibles, the laws of the Medes and the Persians that we read about in the Old Testament. And they are a unique people in the Middle East, having lived largely in the mountains. Those who dislike them called them the hillbillies of the Middle East, but they're far more progressive than that. They have a strong sense of tradition, a strong sense of belonging, a strong sense of culture, and their graciousness, their hospitality, combined with their warrior code, their sort of poet warriors, some have said, makes them distinct in the Middle East. I think it's also important for people to know that they have been mistreated time and again, though they are certainly large enough to warrant their own homeland. Their region up in the north around the Zagros Mountains, overlaying parts of Turkey, parts of Iran, parts of Syria, and of course Iraq, has not been, the boundaries have not been drawn in all of the treaties of Europe after World War I and in more recent times, so they could have their own homeland. So they've ended up being a minority people amongst many of the nations in the Middle East. And that, of course, is their historic complaint. What's brought them to international attention in recent decades, of course, is Saddam's atrocities against them.
So we have this group that is largely, it's correct to say it's mostly a Sunni Muslim group, correct?
That's correct.
We have this group that has, they're predominantly living in specific areas of a variety of countries, as you've mentioned. One of the most interesting things to me about the Kurds is if we go back to the Ottoman Empire, right? We have these circumstances where in a lot of the recent conversations on corporate media, including the kind of kerfuffle on the Bill Maher program, one of the things that I think was missing from the analyses that was being made by everybody was that before the Ottoman Empire, pre-dissolution of the Ottoman Empire, the Muslim people were much more united as a people, so to speak, and that now you see very significant differences between Muslims in different parts of that part of the world. Something similar has happened with the Kurds, has it not, where they're no longer, even though they all, I guess we could say, share this general desire for a land that is their own, they are not really a unified group in any sense of the word.
Well, the Kurds do have their divisions. They've had an embarrassing civil war right at a time they might have been taking their control of their own destiny into their hands, just after the no-fly zone in the early 90s. And of course, what really has caused them grief in recent years is that so much of what they have suffered, even during the Saddam years, was a result of mistreatment by their Islamic brothers. So I sat with the senior mullah of Kurdistan not too long ago, and he told me that he had no intention of letting the more extremist kind of Islam that had done them damage for so many years into his region. The Kurds are very moderate. They have women on their Supreme Court. They have women commanding Peshmerga troops, female entrepreneurs. There's a Christian department in the KRG, the Kurdish regional government. So they actually have a government devoted to Christians, devoted to Yazidis. They're very moderate, very open to other religious expressions, but you're absolutely right. They're suspicious of the surrounding Islamic world because that world has conspired against them so much in recent decades.
Can you talk to us a little bit, Stephen, about, I think one of the most important things right now, because of all of the misinformation that is often spread about the so-called inherent violence of any population that is Muslim, I want to talk a little bit about the Kurds in that context so we can not kind of caricature them or lump them in with any group they don't deserve to be. In my research, I came across what I would call numerous individual or anecdotal instances, stories of kidnappings by Kurds, violence against Christian minorities by Kurds, etc. contextualize it for us in terms of what can we look at these incidents as isolated in some way, and if so, why? Or what does it really tell us about the Kurds?
Well, anyone who's making the case that the Kurds are an angelic people are making a foolish case. This is a people group of as many as 30 million people. Will there be crimes? Will there be religious bigotry? Will there be violence? Of course there will. On the whole, though, what's appealing about the Kurds is their moderation, are the few, very, very few killings that took place once they had their affairs in their own hands and they were protected from Saddam. I would never try to make the case that there are people, free of violence, free of religious bigotry. In fact, one of the things I put in my book that concerns me is that they share with the rest of the Muslim world in the Middle East portion of the Muslim world anyway, a rise in honor killings, particularly in the rural areas. You have, women who will go to the cities, go to universities, learn sort of Western ways or looser ways than perhaps their rural context would want religiously. And there are honor killings, so to speak. Of course, I would consider them dishonor killings, but you understand that's the term that is used.
Yeah.
And so this concerns me greatly. So it's wise that we set this in context. No one is saying that the Kurds are without some of the violence, some of the persecution. I've had Christian friends assassinated in Kurdish cities. The difference, perhaps, is that the Kurdish government came to those of us and apologized and said this is rare. And statistically, it was rare. So you do have a more moderate, slightly more peaceful people than you do in the surrounding area. But again, no one's claiming that they're angels, and they're subject to the same religious extremism as other peoples.
With regard to the current battle against ISIS and the possibilities of any kind of alliance between the U.S. and the Kurds, how do you see the Kurds fitting into this current incursion that involves ISIS?
Well, the Kurds are the most effective fighting force on the ground against ISIS. What's amazing about them, in my view, is that they still see themselves as a U.S. ally, despite the fact that the U.S. government has betrayed them time and again. In fact, one of the worst gassings in human history happened in 1988 in a city called Halabja, and some of the gas that fell on Halabja was sold by U.S. companies to Saddam. Time and again, there have been betrayals. And yet the Kurds see themselves as U.S. allies. So they're willing to fight ISIS. They want to fight ISIS. They understand the threat of ISIS. What they need is arms from the West, particularly the U.S., and close air support. But they're very, very effective fighters. They've proven this time and again. They have a a very strong martial tradition that goes back pre-Ottoman times, and then certainly was enhanced during the Ottoman times. They teach their young from the very beginning to fight, to shoot on one foot and then shoot on the other to develop balance and good targeting.
And what's interesting about that to me, Stephen, not to interrupt, is that in many other contexts, hearing about a group that teaches their children how to fight would be seen as an incredibly negative and concerning thing, right? In other words, in the absence of a strategic, specific that would make that an advantage, we would say, we should be horrified that there's a group that is teaching its children how to shoot guns standing on one foot. And this is what concerns me, because time and time again, we've seen the U.S. arm groups that then we eventually end up fighting against our own weapons, right? And so what can you tell us about how this situation, if you believe it would be different, why would it be different than those countless situations the U.S. gets itself into?
Well, I certainly understand your concern, and I wouldn't lay it aside at all. I think it's valid. The difference perhaps with the Kurds is they've proven themselves time and again. They are not invading other nations. They have never misused what material was given to them. They have no designs, no imperial designs. They have, I guess the best way to say it is they've proven themselves again and again. Now, whenever you arm a people, you take a risk. There's no question that you may see those weapons in another context. We've certainly seen that in Afghanistan. We've seen it elsewhere. But if there are any people on the earth that, in my view, have proven themselves time and again capable of restraint, capable of using the weapons for the purposes for which they were given, it's the Kurds. And that we're talking about decades now. That they have been a people who, though they maintain a martial culture, it's not too unlike, father in Alabama teaching his sons to hunt. I mean, it's approximately at that level. We're not talking about militias here for 16-year-olds or 14-year-olds. But nevertheless, yes, it's something we would need to watch. But I'm not sure we have any other options right now. We don't want to put U.S. boots on the ground against ISIS. ISIS is only about 30,000 warriors. The Kurds, the Peshmerga, are 80 to 100,000. They just need arms. They need strategy. They need close support. And I think that we can defeat ISIS. So we'll have to take that risk, I think, because I'm not sure we have any other options. And they're the best investment that I can see in the region.
All right. Very, very interesting. And the book is fascinating. To remind everybody, we've been speaking with Stephen Mansfield, and the book is The Miracle of the Kurds, a remarkable story of hope reborn in northern Iraq. Stephen, really a pleasure having you on. Thank you.
Great to be with you, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's get to audience questions for the week, starting with a question about the stock market. Hey, David, if the stock market crash continues, what are you going to do as a result in terms of investments? Well, listen, what I've been doing for the last 8 to 10 years is once a month, I buy a little more mutual funds. And what I'm going to be doing once a month is buying a little more mutual funds and not really thinking about it. I mean, that's if you know my investment philosophy, and of course, this is not investment advice, to be clear. I'm telling you what I'm going to do, and this could be terrible advice for other people. This is not advice. It is simply what I am doing. I don't try to time the market. My approach is on a regular basis, accumulate more and more shares of mutual funds, wide, broad-based mutual funds, entire country, total world stock market index mixed in with a little bit of bonds. And when prices drop, I just keep buying. And what is important to remember is you don't really lose money until you sell at a loss. Your unrealized gains go down, your losses go up, depending on whether you're up or down. But until you actually make the call to sell that stock or those mutual funds, you don't really lose anything. You would if you sold, but you don't if you hold. And what is really important to consider is that dividends actually tend to stay relatively level even when stocks decline in value. And what that means is that when there is a stock market correction, assuming, of course, that your time horizon is such that you can, bear the temporary reduction in stock prices, you're buying more dividends for fewer dollars. You're getting more shares if you're putting in $100 a month or however much it is that you're putting in. So I don't try to time the market. I will continue doing what I have been doing for many, many years if we are indeed sort of at the beginning of a stock market decline. And eventually we're going to be at one, right? I mean, we talk all the time, Pat, about how economists are notoriously bad at predicting exactly when these things are going to happen. But at some point, there's going to be a relatively significant stock market correction. And if your time horizon allows for it, what you can do, if you are of my investing philosophy, is do the exact same thing.
Yeah, we're currently in the second longest period of prosperity in American history. So you'd have to imagine it's going to turn around at some point, maybe not today or tomorrow, maybe it's next year or the year after that. We don't know exactly when.
Don't know.
Are you going to invest in any precious metals? Because sometimes when there's a stock market crash, the price of gold and silver start to go up.
That's a form of trying to time certain sectors. And I don't really do that. I have tiny little pieces of precious metals companies because I'm invested in the broadest possible mutual funds in terms of stock, total U.S. stock index and total international stock index. So do I own some precious metals there? Sure. Am I going to try to move money from whatever, something into precious metals as a result of what I'm not going to do that. And particularly because when you do that, you also accumulate taxes that you have to pay. If you have gains, if you have losses, you can write them off. You incur transaction fees depending on, again, what it is that you're doing. So the lowest possible cost, I think I pay 0.05% a year fees on the mutual funds I have or something like that. Lowest possible cost, fewest transactions, just continue accumulating and, let 30, 40 years go by if you have the time.
Yeah, if this happens, I think I'm going to have to put my day trading hobby on the back burner.
Yes.
And it sounds like bad news, but it probably will make me more productive here at the show on a day-to-day basis, because that takes up a lot of time.
It does, and also the online poker playing is probably time to wrap that up. Hey, David, is there any real merit to ultimate fighting and boxing? You didn't really talk about that big fight that took place in Las Vegas. When you were in Las Vegas, the Ultimate Fighting Championship fight, what do you think about it? So, yeah, I wasn't actually in Las Vegas when the fight took place. This was Khabib
Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor.
Yes. And that was a big fight on Saturday, October 6th in Las Vegas. I left in the morning, though. My flight left at 10 a.m., and the fight was at probably 10 p.m. I don't know exactly when it was. 10 p.m. Eastern, anyway. So listen, I don't know that I'm the right person to say whether there's a merit to ultimate fighting and boxing. What I can tell you is the following. I couldn't care less about people beating each other up, and I have never watched any of this stuff except if I was out with friends and they wanted to watch it and I would just hang out. But does that mean that there is no skill involved in this? Of course not. Of course there is. These are... Boxing, I sort of maybe can say less about. But with ultimate fighting, you are talking about athletes who train in very particular and high-level ways, very fine-tuned ways. Their body is a tool. It is a machine that they want to be as fine-tuned as possible for this. Diet is a component. There's psychological components. There is merit to this stuff. Do I watch this? No, I don't care about it. But do I write it off as having no merit whatsoever? I can't do that. It would be wrong for me to do that. Whether it's sort of a great thing for society to make a huge deal out of people, men or women, there's women's ultimate fighting now, beating each other up. I don't know. It doesn't seem like it.
Well,
but
I think it's interesting how mixed martial arts has evolved over the past 20 years or so.
Yeah.
Because now we have a better sense of what a comprehensive fighting style looks like. Like in the early days of the UFC, they had some sumo wrestler guy go up against a karate guy, and they had a jiu-jitsu guy go up against a judo person. We'd see kind of what won out. And now everything is morphed into you have to be able to fight standing up, you have to fight on the ground. And what I thought was interesting about this last fight in Vegas was you had someone with one specialty in grappling versus someone with another specialty in striking.
Sure.
And, it's just one scenario, but you can kind of see what works better, what doesn't work. And, the implications for that, maybe we can learn how to defend ourselves better. I don't know. It's tough to say because you don't want people getting hurt. You don't want brain damage and all those other negative things that come along with it.
I
but
agree.
As a species, maybe it is important for us to know about this stuff.
I guess my position is I'm against the glorification of violence and violence as a sport, but I do believe that there is a lot that goes into the preparation for doing MMA that has more broadly applicable lessons and information or something like that. The one thing I think, is it fair? I mean, I'm just speaking completely off the top of my head because I'm clueless about this stuff, as people can probably tell. Is it fair to say that if you're a good boxer, that doesn't necessarily make you a person who has the skills for really being set up to defend yourself properly in a street fight, whereas the MMA skills, because you may end up getting knocked down to the ground or whatever, boxing is a much more narrow set of skills than what MMA requires?
MMA is a lot more practical because, a lot of street fights end up on the ground, and you have to be able to defend yourself not only standing up but on the ground too. I mean, an average person against a trained boxer in a street fight, it's pretty obvious the boxer's going to win. But if you take any run-of-the-mill MMA person versus a run-of-the-mill boxer, I'd favor the MMA guy because he can just, tackle him, and that's going to be it.
Yes. I mean, I think assuming that you're in a street fight situation, I think if you put an MMA guy with a boxing guy in the ring and you tell them the rules are boxing rules, the boxer wins. If you put an MMA woman and a female boxer in the octagon and say the rules are MMA rules, I think the MMA fighter probably wins every time.
But the thing is that MMA rules are a lot closer to an actual street fight.
I agree.
There are very few exceptions to that. You can't eye gouge. I don't think you could pull hair and that sort of off limits type stuff. But it's very similar to what you would encounter on the street.
How much was it for pay-per-view for this fight? Do you know? Is it
probably
up to
$100?
Is it that much now?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. See, I could never get myself to care enough to pay that unless I don't know, maybe if I knew one of the people fighting, but even then, I don't think I'd want to see them get beat up, right? If it's somebody I care about. It seems horrible. Anyway, tell me where I'm wrong. I know people will write in, including with links to Joe Rogan videos explaining to me why I don't know anything about this. And I admit, I know very little about it. Brittany wrote in, hey, David, besides voting, what do you think are the most effective forms of activism? Donations, protests, phone banking, volunteering, writing public comments. What are the least effective? I personally spend a fair amount of time contributing public comments on the Federal Register, but given that the administration is so hostile to liberal views, I've wondered if it even matters because they will just be ignored, as the FCC did with net neutrality. So when it comes to activism, there's tactics versus strategy, okay? Whatever the tactics, the most effective activism is going to engage people across political lines, if that's possible. You will have a huge advantage in successful activism if you can get people involved in your movement, supporting your movement, across ideological and political lines, so that the movement cannot be written off as merely partisan politics. Now, unfortunately, people who watch the show probably know that a lot of the really important issues that we're facing today are extremely partisan in nature. So that is going to be very, very difficult to do. So in terms of tactics, not all tactics are created equal. So mass demonstrations, for example, mass demonstrations of support by flooding the offices of lawmakers physically by showing up and protesting, and with letters and emails and faxes and all of that stuff, that is a more effective tactic than signing petitions on the internet.
Yeah.
Period.
Example A would be Jeff Flake. He maybe changed his mind on the Brett Kavanaugh situation because of two female protesters who accosted him in an elevator.
Maybe.
Now, ultimately, Jeff Flake didn't, stick to his guns, and he ended up supporting Kavanaugh in the end, but it held the investigation off for like another week.
Another example, showing up somewhere as part of a public demonstration is probably more effective than Facebook meme activism. But I'm coming up with sort of like extreme examples, right? But I think the point is that in terms of strategy, you want a message that is inclusive and has broad appeal. And in terms of tactics, you really want to think about which tactics to apply. The question that I think is the most important one to ask when you are considering strategy and tactics for activism is, how do we influence public opinion most effectively? Which tactics have the potential to reach the most people and swing public opinion? Because ultimately, the way our system works right now is a system of constant running for re-election every 2 years for the House of Representatives, every 6 years for senators, every 4 years for presidents. So if you can impact public opinion such that it puts pressure on lawmakers because they, of course, have to think about their next re-election campaign, that is going to be a way to at least have a chance of getting results more quickly than if you aren't influencing public opinion and only lobbying lawmakers directly. In the end, money, right? I mean, unfortunately, right now, we know that money wins more often than not when it comes to the candidate. Money wins very often when it comes to which side of a political activism issue has more money behind it. So I don't like this. We need to change campaign finance, but part of the strategy right now has to be, if you want successful activism, it has to consider that you need money.
Yeah, candidates do need money to get their message out, that's for sure. It's really just about where the source of that money comes from, right?
I agree.
Instead of corporate PACs, it would be great if we could get individual contributions up, similar to what Bernie Sanders did in 2016. Just $27 at a time, that's all you need.
It would be great to remove that altogether. But as I've said before, for as long as that is part of the political system, to ignore it would be absolutely silly. And activism needs that as well. I don't like it. I'm not cheering the system we have, but what I'm telling you is that that's the reality that we're dealing with. I want to hear from you about this. What are, in your mind, the most effective activism tactics, and what are the less effective activism tactics? Let me know. We've got a great bonus show coming up for you today. Sign up for membership at www.joinpacman.com to get instant access. It's not just membership that gets you access to the bonus show. Become a patron for at least $5 a month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. That'll also get you access. Both work. I will talk to you on the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.